Mainline Engines by the Reverend W. Audrey. Read and adapted by Joshua Boston. The Diesel. Bill and Ben are tank engine twins who live at a port near Edwards Line. Each has 4 wheels, a tiny chimney and dome, and a small squat cab. Both are kept busy pulling freight cars for ships in the harbor and engines on the main line. The cars are filled with china clay dug from the nearby hills. China clay is important. It's needed for pottery, paper, paints, plastics, and many other things. One morning, the twins arranged some cars and went away for more. They returned to find them all gone. The twins were most surprised. Their drivers examined a patch of oil. "It's a diesel," they said, wiping the rails clean.
"It's a waddle?"
asked Bill.
Diesel, I think,
replied Ben.
"There's a notice about them in our shed. I remember. Coughs and sneezels spread diseasels. Hey, you had a cough in your smoke box yesterday. Fireman Quinn did, didn't he?" "Yes, but the dust made him sneasel. So there you are. It's your fault the diesel came." "It isn't. It is."
"Stop arguing, you two," laughed their drivers. "Come on, let's go and rescue our freight cars." Bill and Ben were aghast and horrified.
"But the diesel will magic us away like the freight cars."
Their drivers laughed. "He won't magic us. More likely we'll magic him. Listen, he doesn't know you're twins. So we'll take your names and numbers off, and then this is what we'll do." Bill and Ben chuckled with delight.
"Come on, let's go,"
they said eagerly, and puffing hard, the twins set off on their journey to find the diesel and the freight cars. They were looking forward to playing tricks on him. Creeping into Edward's yard, they found the diesel on a siding with the missing cars. Ben hid behind, but Bill went boldly alongside and stood facing the diesel on the points leading out to the main line. The diesel looked up. "Do you mind?" he asked.
"Yes,"
said Bill.
"I do. I want my cars back, please."
"These are mine," said the diesel. "Go away." Bill pretended to be frightened.
"You're a big bully,"
he whimpered.
"You'll be sorry."
He moved over the points, ran back, and hid behind the cars on the other side. Ben now came forward. The diesel had to stop suddenly.
"Car stealer!"
hissed Ben. He ran away too. Bill took his place. This went on and on until the diesel's eyes nearly popped out. "Stop!" he begged. "You're making me giddy." The 2 engines gazed at him side by side. He shut his eyes. "Are there 2 of you?"
"Yes, we're twins."
"I might have known it," he groaned. Just then, Edward bustled up. "Bill and Ben," he scolded the twins. "Why are you playing here?"
"We're not playing,"
protested Bill.
"We're rescuing our cars,"
squeaked Ben. "What do you mean?"
"Even you don't come in our yard without asking, and you only take the cars we give you. But this diesel didn't even ask. He just took the entire lot."
"There is no cause to be rude," said Edward severely. "This engine is a Metropolitan Vickers Diesel Electric Type 2. The twins were abashed.
"Oh, well, we're sorry, Mr.
"Never mind," smiled the diesel. "Call me Boco. I'm sorry you didn't understand about the cars." "That's all right then," said Edward. "Off you go, Bill and Ben. Fetch Boco's freight cars, then you can take these." The twins scampered away. Edward smiled. "There's no real harm in them," he said to Boco, "but they are maddening at times." Boco chuckled. "Maddening," he said, "is the word." Buzz Buzz. Trevor the traction engine was enjoying his work in the vicarage orchard. Birds were singing and apples were ripening on the trees. It was a lovely day. "Hello, Trevor," said James. "You look as bright and cheerful as my red paint." "Oh, I am," replied Trevor. Then James heard some strange sort of buzzing. "What's that noise?" he asked. "It's the bees," laughed Trevor. "They're all in these boxy things called beehives. I'm taking them to the station. The vicar says that his bees make good honey, and he's giving some of them to his friends." Just then, Boco, the diesel engine, hummed in. "Take care, you two. Don't make the bees angry. They might sting you." James didn't like being told what to do by a diesel, and he buzzed away. "Goodbye, Trevor," called Boco, and he set off to see Duck at the next station. Bill and Ben were busy arranging cars at the station, but they scampered off as soon as they saw Boco. He finished arranging the cars, then went to the shed and asked politely if he could come in. Duck was not exactly pleased to see a diesel, but presently, when he found out that Boco knew Edward, he became more friendly. And by the time Boco began telling him about Bill and Ben, they were soon laughing like they were old friends. "I remember the first time I met those two," laughed Boco. "They nearly made my eyes pop out. Edward soon put a stop to their games. Have they ever played tricks on you?" "Goodness me, yes," chuckled Duck. "Edward is the only one who can keep those two in order. I sometimes call them the bees." "A good name," replied Boco. "They're terrors when they start buzzing around." Just then James bustled in. "What's that, Duck? Are you afraid of bees? They're only insects, you know, so don't let that buzzbox diesel tell you different." "His name is Boco, and he didn't. I wouldn't care if hundreds were swarming around," interrupted James. "I just blow smoke at them and make them buzz off." "Buzz, buzz, buzz," retorted Duck. James retired into a huff. The next morning, James arrived at the station to take the express. And when Duck brought his coaches to the platform, it was crowded. The passengers were excited and keen to get on board. But two porters were in a hurry. "Mind your backs! Mind your backs!" they shouted as they took a loaded trolley to the front van. Fred drove, while Bert walked behind. "Careful, Fred! Careful!" warned Bert. But Fred was in so much of a hurry, he didn't bother to listen. Then there was trouble. An old lady suddenly appeared in front. Fred stopped dead, but the luggage slid forward and burst open the lid of a large white wooden box before it toppled over and broke open on the ground. Someone shouted a warning, and the platform cleared like magic. Just as James came backing down, he heard a familiar buzzing. Some bees flew out of their broken beehive and began to explore the station. The bees were too sleepy to be cross. They found the empty station cold, so they buzzed around the fireman who was trying to couple the train, hoping he would mend their hive so they could go back and be warm again. But the fireman didn't understand. He thought they would sting him. He gave a yell, ran back to the cab, and crouched with his jacket over his head. The driver didn't understand either. He swatted at the bees with the fireman's shovel. The bees, disappointed, then turned to James. His boiler was nice and warm, and the bees swarmed around it happily. "Buzz off! Buzz off!" hissed James. He made smoke, but the wind blew it away, and the bees stayed. At last, one bee settled on his hot smoke box and burned his foot. The bee thought James had burned him on purpose. So it stung James right back on the nose. "Eek!" whistled James. He had had enough. So had his driver and fireman. They started off without the conductor's whistle, and they didn't notice till too late that they had left their train behind. So they instead tried everything to get rid of the bees. First, they spun around the turntable, but to no avail. They tried washing them off, but the bees clung harder to James's warm boiler. Then they tried smoking them out by going through a very long tunnel, but still the bees wouldn't go away. "It's no good, James," said his driver. We'll just have to go back to the orchard and fetch another hive. James's reply was drowned by the sound of buzzing. The vicar was waiting anxiously for James. When he arrived, the bees swarmed straight into their new home. "Come on, James," said his driver. "What you need now is a good hose down." In the end, it was Boco who pulled the express. He was worried at first about leaving his freight cars, but Duck promised to look after them. And so it was arranged. He managed to gain back some of the lost time, and Sir Topham Hatt was pleased with him. No one seemed to notice when James came back to the shed that night. They were too busy talking about a new beehive on wheels. It was red, they said. Then they all said buzz, 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 and laughed a lot. James thought that the big mainline engines were being very silly. Later that evening, the vicar came to see James. "Thank you for saving my bees," said the vicar. "It's a pity it's not Christmas. Then we can call you James the Red-Nosed Engine." Everyone laughed, even James. But soon they decided to instead call him the Bee's Knees, which means they thought he was more useful than ever. Wrong road. Thomas's branch line is very important, and so is Edward's. They both bring in valuable traffic, but their track and bridges are not as strong as those on the main line. That is why Sir Topham Hatt does not allow the heavier mainline engines like Gordon and Henry to run on them. But one day, the way Gordon was talking to Edward, you would have thought that Sir Topham Hatt had forbidden him to run on branch lines for quite another reason. "It's not fair," grumbled Gordon. "What isn't fair?" asked Edward. "Letting branch line diesels pull mainline trains." "Never mind, Gordon. I'm sure Boco would let you pull his freight car sometimes. That would make it quite fair." Gordon spluttered furiously. "I won't pull Boco's dirty cars. I won't run on branch lines." "Why not? It would be a nice change." "Sir Topham Hatt would never approve," said Gordon loftily. "Branch lines are vulgar." He puffed away in a dignified manner. Edward chuckled and followed him to the station. Every evening, the two engines pull two fast trains from the station. Gordon always leaves first at 6:25 with an express to the main line. Edward follows 5 minutes later at 6:30 with his train for the branch. Usually, everything runs like clockwork, but this evening, there was trouble. Gordon, his driver, and his fireman all say it was the lady's fault. She wore a green floppy hat and was saying goodbye to a friend sitting in the coach nearest the conductor's van. It was almost time to start. The fireman looked back. He was new to the job. He couldn't see the conductor, but he did see something green waving. He thought it was the flag. "Right away, mate," he called. But the conductor had not waved his flag. When Gordon started, he left some luggage, several indignant passengers, and the conductor all standing on the platform. To make matters worse, by the time Gordon had been stopped and brought back, Edward's train was overdue. "You missed your path, Gordon," said Sir Topham Hatt crossly. "Now we must clear Edward's train before you can start." This should have put everything right with the least possible trouble, but control at the big station made things worse. They forgot to warn the signalman at Edward's Junction about the change of plans. It was dark by the time the trains reached the junction, and you can guess what happened. By mistake, the signalman let Edward through on the main line, while Gordon was switched to the branch. It took Sir Topham Hatt several hours to sort out the tangle and pacify the passengers. In the end, Gordon was left with his fire drawn, cold and cross, on one of Edward's sidings near the harbor. Next morning, Bill and Ben peeped into the yard. They wondered if Boco had given them some freight cars. There were no cars for them, but they didn't mind that. Teasing Gordon would be much better fun.
"Ooh, what's that?"
asked Bill loudly.
"Shush!"
whispered Ben.
"It's Gordon." It looks like Gordon, but it can't be. Gordon never comes on branch lines. He thinks them vulgar.
Gordon pretended he hadn't heard them.
If it isn't Gordon,
said Ben.
It's just a pile of old iron, which we better take to the scrapyard. No, Bill, this lot's useless for scrap. We'll take it to the harbor. We'll take it to the harbor and dump it in the sea.
Gordon was alarmed. I am Gordon! Stop! Stop! The twins paid no attention. Gordon shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. The twins argued loudly and long. Bill favored the scrapyard, but Ben said that the cutting up in such places was something cruel.
It would be kinder,
he urged,
to give these remains a quick end in the sea. Besides, Bill,
he went on,
they would make such a lovely splash.
Gordon could not view either prospect with any enthusiasm. Up to that time, he had disapproved of diesels. They were, he considered, ugly, smelly, and noisy. But when he opened his eyes and saw Boco coming into the yard, he thought him the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. Boco, my dear engine, save me! Boco quickly sized up the situation and sent Bill and Ben about their business. They were cheeky at first, but Boco threatened to take away the cars full of coal he had brought for them. This made the twins behave at once. Gordon thought Boco was wonderful. Those little demons, he said. How do you do it? Oh, well, said Boco. It's just a knack. Gordon still believes to this day that Boco saved his life. But we know that the twins were only teasing, don't we? Edward's exploit. Edward scolded the twins severely, but told Gordon it served him right. Gordon was furious. A few days later, some enthusiasts came, and Bertie the bus was busy giving them a tour of the island of Sodor. On their last afternoon, Edward was preparing to take them to meet Bill and Ben. He found it hard to start the heavy train. Did you see him straining? Asked Henry. Positively painful, remarked James. Just pathetic, grunted Gordon. He should give up and be preserved before it's far too late. Shut up, burst out Duck. You're all jealous. Edward's better than any of you. You're right, Duck, said Boco. Edward's old, but he'll surprise us all. I've done it. We're off. I've done it. We're off, said Edward, as he finally puffed out of the station. Bill and Ben were delighted to see the visitors. They loved being photographed. Later, they took the party to the China Clay Works in a brake van special. Everyone had a splendid time, and the visitors were most impressed. Then Edward took the visitors home. On the way, however, the weather changed. Wind and rain buffeted Edward. His sanding gear failed, his wheels slipped, and his firemen rode in front, dropping sand on the rails by hand. Come on, come on, come on, panted Edward breathlessly. This is dreadful. But there was worse to come. Before his driver could check them, suddenly Edward's wheels slipped fiercely again and again, and with a shrieking crack, something broke and battered his frame and splashes up and out of shape. The passengers gathered around while the crew inspected the damage. Repairs took some time. One of your crank pins broke, Edward, said his driver at last. We've taken your side rods off. Now you're a single, like an old-fashioned engine. Can you get these people home? They must start back tonight. I'll try, sir, promised Edward. They brought the train back down to where the line was more nearly level. Edward puffed and pulled his hardest, but his wheels kept slipping and he couldn't start the heavy train. The passengers were getting anxious. The driver, fireman, and conductor went along the train, making adjustments between the coaches. We've loosened the couplings, Edward, they said. Now you can pick up your coaches one by one, just as you do with freight cars. "That'll be much easier," said Edward gratefully. So, with the fireman standing carefully in front, the driver gently opened the regulator. "Come on," puffed Edward, and he moved cautiously forward, ready to take the strain as his tender coupling tightened against the weight of the first coach. The first coach moving helped to start the second helped the third, and so on down the train. "I've done it! I've done it!" puffed Edward, his wheels spinning with excitement. "Steady, boy," warned his driver, skillfully checking the wheel slip. "Well done, boy! You've got them! You've got them!" And he listened happily to Edward's steady beat as he forged slowly but surely up the hill. The passengers were thrilled. Most had their heads out of the windows. They waved and shouted, cheering Edward on. Meanwhile, Sir Topham Hatt paced the platform. Henry, with the special train, was waiting anxiously too. Then, in the distance, they heard beep, beep, and then at last, battered, weary, but unbeaten, Edward steamed into the station. Sir Topham Hatt stepped forward and angrily pointed to the clock, but excited passengers swept him aside. They cheered and thanked Edward, his driver, and firemen to the echo, before rushing off again to Henry's train. Henry then steamed away to another storm of cheers, but not before everyone had heard Edward's story. Edward thankfully went to the shed, while Duck and Boco saw to it that Edward was left in peace. Gordon and James remained respectfully silent. Sir Topham Hatt then asked Boco to look after Edward's line while he was being mended. Boco was pleased. He worked well, and now they run it together. Bill and Ben still tease him, but Boco doesn't mind. He lives in Edward's station, but he's welcome anywhere, for he is now one of the family. Donald and Douglas were the last to accept him, but he often helps with their goods trains. And the other day they were heard to remark, "For a diesel, young Boco's ne'er such a bad engine." That, from the Caledonian twins, is high praise indeed.